After living a life of a virgin, like some of you guys, and felt stuck, Will is reborn into a completely new world. When he opens his eyes, he finds himself being cared for by 3 unusual guardians, a skeleton, a ghost, and a mummy. They live in the remains of an ancient city and treat Will like their own child. The skeleton, named Blood, teaches him how to fight. The ghost, Gus, helps him master magic. And the mummy, Mary, guides him in religion and what it means to be responsible. As Will grows older, he learns more about the world around him and gets ready for the day he'll have to leave home and go for creating his own harem. Our story starts with Will, who used to be just an ordinary guy, like working 9 to 5, playing video games and shaking his cucumber all night. One day, out of nowhere, he dies and finds himself in a completely different world, surrounded by 3 demons inside an old, crumbling temple. At first, Will is terrified, thinking he's somehow ended up in hell. He cries, fearing the worst, but soon he realizes that these demons aren't there to hurt him. Instead, they take him in and start raising him. Because he still has the mind of an adult, Will quickly picks up on their language. One day, Mary, the female demon, takes him outside the temple for the first time and shows him the breathtaking beauty of this new world. The sight moves Will to tears, making him feel like this is some kind of divine sign, a chance to start fresh and live a meaningful life. Mary is a mummy priestess and is like a mother figure to Will. Along with her, there are 2 other demons helping raise him. Gus is a snarky ghost who used to be one of the world's most powerful wizards. He's a bit obsessed with money, but he's the one who teaches Will about the world's myths and how to use magic through powerful words. Then there's Blood, a strong skeleton warrior, and the father figure in Will's life. Blood trains him to be both a skilled fighter and became god in bed with unstoppable stamina. Sorry guys, I mean a nice person.
Yeah, boy.
Will enjoys his life with his demon family, but there are a lot of mysteries they're hiding from him. However, he never dares to ask them about it, because he's keeping his own secret too, the memories of his previous life in Japan. After years of intense training, Blood and Gus tell Will that he's finally ready for some real combat experience. Gus warns Will that Blood is much faster than he seems. Before Will can even respond, Blood rushes at him with a quick slash. Will barely dodges the attack, escaping just in time. Blood doesn't let up and chases after him, but Will uses an acceleration spell to zip out of reach. Thinking quickly, Will creates a slippery puddle that causes Blood to lose his balance and fall. Seizing the opportunity, Will casts his falling spiderweb spell, trying to trap Blood, but the powerful skeleton warrior effortlessly slashes through the web and disarms Will with a single strike. Aside from his combat lessons, Mary teaches Will important life skills, making sure he's prepared for anything life might throw at him. One day, after finishing his training, Will sees Mary entering the temple of the Earth Goddess. Will isn't usually allowed to watch her pray, but his curiosity gets the best of him. He sneaks up and peeks through the door, only to see Mary engulfed in flames. Panicking, Will rushes towards her, screaming for help and trying to pull her out of the fire. His arms begin to burn, and before he knows it, he collapses, unconscious. When Will wakes up, he's back in his room, surrounded by Mary, Gus, and Blood. Mary is in tears, blaming herself for not being more careful, but Will apologizes for letting his curiosity get the better of him. Saddened, Mary reveals a deep truth to Will. She, Gus, and Blood were all once human. When they died, their strong emotions prevented their souls from moving on. In desperation, they made a pact with the god of the undead to remain in this world. But that made them enemies of Mater, the goddess of earth and life. That's why, whenever Mary tries to pray to the earth goddess, she is consumed by fire. And yet, despite this, Mary has continued to pray for as long as she can remember. Will, touched by Mary's story, asks if he can pray with her. He wants to understand what she feels when she prays to the earth goddess, even if it means facing the same fire that burns her. 5 years have passed since that incident with Mary, and now Will is 13 years old. Over the years, he has been devoted to praying to the gods, becoming so focused that he can now meditate for 5 days straight without needing rest or food. His lessons with Gus have gotten tougher, but he's determined to master them. Blood continues to train him every day, sharpening his combat skills. One day, Blood decides to test Will by having him fight a real undead demon he had captured. Though a little anxious, Will defeats the demon easily with one perfectly executed strike. Blood is taken aback by how quickly Will handled the situation, but Will just laughs it off, playfully bragging that he must be a genius. Blood thinks for a moment and tells Will he might be ready for a more serious challenge. Blood then takes Will to the abandoned city nearby and explains that, decades ago, this place was once a bustling city full of humans and dwarves. However, after a catastrophic disaster wiped out the population, only undead demons remain there now. Blood leads Will deep into a dark tunnel beneath the city and leaves him there, telling him to survive and find his way out on his own. Before Will can say anything, Blood vanishes, snuffing out the light and leaving him in complete darkness. Will feels lost at first, but he gathers himself and uses his magic to create a light. As he moves forward, he encounters a group of undead skeletons. Using his skills, he destroys them with ease and presses on. However, as he turns a corner, he suddenly comes face to face with a larger, stronger undead skeleton armed with a spear. For a moment, Will feels a flicker of fear, but then he thinks about what Blood would do, realizing that running away isn't an option. Will charges at the demon, swinging his sword. The undead skeleton dodges his attack and quickly starts casting a spell. Will, shocked that the demon can use magic, reacts on instinct and nullifies the spell. He then delivers a powerful strike to the demon's head, but in doing so, his sword shatters. Luckily, the blow is enough to defeat the demon. Will picks up the demon's spear and discovers it's a magical weapon crafted by dwarves. Feeling he's close to an exit, Will moves ahead cautiously, but then he senses someone behind him. When he turns around, he sees Gus standing there, watching him in silence. Will, feeling a sudden chill down his spine, asks Gus what he's doing here. Gus says nothing, just broods and stares at him with an intense gaze. Will gets the unsettling feeling that something is very wrong. Confused and on edge, he nervously asks if this is some kind of lesson Gus has planned for him. But then, without warning, Gus summons a massive stone golem that charges straight at Will. Acting quickly, Will dodges back and stabs the golem in the torso, shattering it to pieces. Before he can catch his breath, Gus hurls stones at him, forcing Will to run and dodge while deflecting the magic traps Gus throws his way. It feels like a game of cat and mouse, but then Gus starts casting multiple spells at once, overwhelming Will. He tries to keep up, but it's too much. He trips and falls, panic setting in as he sees Gus preparing another deadly attack. Will's mind races and fear grips him. He doesn't want to die, especially not by the hands of his beloved teacher. Desperate, he closes his eyes, making a painful decision. If it comes down to it, he'll have to kill Gus. Gathering his courage, Will charges forward and thrusts his spear toward Gus, only to stop just inches from his body. His hands tremble, and the spear falls to the ground as he chokes back tears. With his voice shaking, Will tells Gus that he sees him as a grandfather and just wants to know why he's doing this. If you really want to kill me, Will says, his voice cracking, then I'm ready to accept it.
Sad.
I'd rather die than harm my family. Tears stream down his face, and for a moment, there's only silence. Then, suddenly, Gus breaks into a cheerful laugh, dropping his sinister act. You've done really well, kid, he says with a grin, as if the whole thing was some elaborate test. Will, still shaken and confused, is relieved that Gus doesn't actually want to kill him, but deep down, he knows something isn't right. This wasn't just a lesson, there's more going on that Gus isn't telling him. Gus leads him out of the dungeon, and they return home. Will decides to keep the incident between him and Gus a secret from both Mary and Blood, unsure of how to explain what just happened. Later, Gus teaches Will how to appraise his new spear, showing him its special abilities. It can glow on command and even change its length thanks to the magical spells engraved on it. Armed with his new weapon, Will begins making regular trips to the tunnels in the abandoned city. Over time, he becomes skilled at dealing with the monsters that roam there, collecting scraps of armor along the way. Meanwhile, Gus gradually reduces the intensity of his lessons, telling Will that he's learned more than enough. Though the tension between them remains, Will continues to grow stronger, preparing for whatever challenges lie ahead. One night, Gus summons Will to his chambers and reveals something shocking. Before Will turns 15, Blood will likely challenge him to a serious duel. What surprises Will even more is that Gus wants him to purposely lose the duel, but in a way that Blood doesn't suspect it was intentional. Confused and a bit angry, Will demands to know why Gus would ask such a thing. Gus, however, refuses to explain, saying it's a secret he cannot reveal. Frustrated by Gus's constant secrecy, Will firmly tells him that unless he gets an answer, he won't go along with the plan. With the duel approaching, Will spends the next few months pushing his training to the limit, determined to prepare himself for the challenge. Finally, the day of the duel arrives. Blood stands ready, waiting for him, and the battle begins. As they draw their swords, Blood attacks with a flurry of powerful, fast strikes that Will barely manages to block. Pushed back by the sheer force of Blood's blows, Will suddenly charges forward, using Blood's own sword to deflect and gain momentum. He leaps into the air and stabs Blood directly in the chest. Blood staggers backward, caught off guard by the unexpected move, but quickly throws Will aside and drives his sword into Will's ribs. Blood then points another sword at Will, forcing him to surrender. As soon as the duel ends, Mary rushes to Will's side, asking if he's alright. She scolds Blood for using his dangerous tactic of jamming swords into his own body, reminding him that he had promised her not to do it again. After thoroughly lecturing Blood, the three of them sit down together. Blood praises Will, telling him that even though he didn't win, he fought well. Will, moved by the warmth of the moment, thanks both Mary and Blood, calling them Mom and Dad for the first time. Hearing this, they smile with happiness. Blood then tells Will that although he doesn't have any special techniques left to teach him, he has a gift for him. He presents Will with a purple sword, calling it one of the most powerful demon blades in existence. Will, a bit surprised, says, "But I didn't even win the fight." Blood replies that the sword isn't a reward for winning, but a mark of his independence. Blood explains that the sword is called Overeater, a blade so powerful that even the gods fear it. Not only does it possess immense strength, but it also has a life-stealing ability. Every time Will injures an enemy with the sword, it heals him in return. However, there's a dangerous drawback. The more one uses Overeater, the more they become dependent on it, and it can stunt their own growth as a warrior. Realizing the potential risks, Will promises to be careful with the sword. After the duel, Blood and Mary finally decide to reveal the secrets they've been keeping from Will all this time. They sit down and begin telling him their story, starting from the very beginning. A long time ago, all the demon lords united under the command of a cruel and ruthless demon known as the High King. This demon had a terrifying ability. He could create soldiers and generals out of his own blood and flesh. Wielding the sword Overeater, he would intentionally injure himself to grow an army of demons, then heal himself by killing his enemies. Using these powers, the High King quickly conquered the continent, starting with the ruined city near where Blood, Gus, and Mary live today. As the continent neared total collapse, Gus, then a legendary wandering mage, devised a plan to defeat the High King. He sought the help of Blood, a legendary warrior, and Mary, a skilled priestess. Together, they planned to infiltrate the High King's city and steal his demon blade, Overeater, hoping that without the sword, the High King's power would be greatly diminished and they could finally kill him. However, the plan went horribly wrong. When they reached the High King, he transformed into a massive demon, far stronger than they had anticipated. His swordsmanship was unmatched, and even Blood, with all his skill, couldn't land a single blow on him. In a desperate move, Gus and Mary managed to seal the High King, trapping him for the time being. But just as they thought they had succeeded, Stagnate, the god of the undead, intervened. He made them an offer. He would wipe out all the demons on the continent if they agreed to become his undead servants. With no other option and time running out, all three of them accepted. Blood was turned into a skeleton, Gus became a ghost, and Mary a mummy. True to his word, Stagnate destroyed all the demons, but instead of freeing the world, he cursed it with stagnation. He didn't kill the demons, he transformed them into undead, trapping the world in an endless, lifeless state. Blood explains that the three of them are the highest ranking undead and have been guarding the seal of the High King for over 200 years, ensuring that he never escapes. Then, one day, a group of demons brought a human baby into the temple, intending to sacrifice it to one of the dark gods to break the High King's seal. Blood killed them before they could carry out their plan. Gus initially wanted to leave the baby alone in the woods, but Mary and Blood outvoted him. They decided to keep the baby and raise it as their own, and that baby was Will. At this point, Mary stands up and embraces Will, telling him that she will always love him, no matter what happens. Blood also expresses his feelings, saying that Will is the best student he could have ever hoped for. Will, however, feels a wave of confusion wash over him. Both Mary and Blood sound like they're saying their final goodbyes. Suddenly, dark clouds begin to swirl around Will, and the shadowy figure of Stagnate, the god of the undead, looms overhead. His voice booms as he demands Blood and Mary hand over their souls if they've severed their ties to their duty of guarding the High King's seal. Overcome by the terror of the god's presence, an echo of his power in the mortal realm, Will collapses to the ground, powerless in front of the dark deity's clone. Just as Stagnate is about to act, the ground splits open, and Gus makes a dramatic entrance, arriving in style. He orders Will to take Mary and Blood to safety while he faces off against Stagnate. Despite the god's arrogance, Gus stands tall and majestic, casting powerful spells one after another, binding Stagnate in place. The god's echo, though fearsome, struggles against Gus's barrage of magic. In the end, Gus unleashes a flurry of destructive spells that force Stagnate's clone to retreat, sending him back to his realm. Gus walks over to Will, reassuring him that everything is fine and that he can relax. Will, though shaken, is relieved that his family is safe. But before he can even respond, a horrible sound pierces the air. Gus is suddenly split in half. Horrified, Will watches as Stagnate reappears, emerging from behind them, mocking Gus for thinking he could so easily defeat a god's echo. The god's shadowy form effortlessly throws Gus aside and advances toward Will. Stagnate coldly reveals his intentions, explaining that Blood, Mary, and Gus were always his ultimate soldiers. Now that their vigil guarding the High King's seal had faltered, he could claim their souls. He adds that Will's presence had weakened their resolve, making it easy for him to take what he had been waiting centuries for, even though Gus had tried to keep them anchored to their duty. Stagnate then offers Will a terrible choice: join his army and live a twisted version of happiness with his family or face the consequences. He gives Will until the next day to decide and vanishes. Devastated, Will carries the fallen forms of Blood, Mary, and Gus back inside. He realizes that Gus had been doing everything he could to prevent their souls from being taken, all without hurting his student. Will is consumed with guilt, blaming himself for living selfishly and causing this disaster. He breaks down in tears, feeling like he had only ever disappointed his loved ones in his past life and now in this one too. Exhausted from crying, Will falls asleep, and the next morning, he wakes to find the three undead acting as if nothing had happened, trying to keep him from blaming himself. But Will can't hold it in anymore. He finally reveals the truth to them, that he is reincarnated and that he's always been a worthless failure in both of his lives. Mary, furious at his self-loathing, slaps him hard across the face, telling him never to speak such harsh words about himself again. The slap shakes Will to his senses, and he stands up with renewed determination. He declares that he will protect them all, no matter what. Will then heads to the temple and prays to the gods for strength and guidance. With his resolve firm, he marches to confront Stagnate, who is waiting for his answer. Will looks him straight in the eye, his heart burning with conviction, and declares, "I will never make any pact with you. I'll defeat you, no matter the cost." Stagnate watches with amusement and summons a horde of undead demons, ordering them to attack Will. Surrounded by enemies, Will leaps into action, using his spear to cut through several demons with ease. He casts binding spells to trap some and then uses his acceleration magic to blitz the others, moving so fast that it even catches Stagnate off guard. However, the sheer number of demons begins to overwhelm him, and Will gets injured in the fierce battle. Impressed, Stagnate halts the assault and compliments Will on his abilities. Once again, the god offers him a position as a general in his undead army, promising an eternity of happiness with his family. For a moment, Will seems confused and starts to waver. Stagnate then pours his blood into a goblet and offers it to Will, tempting him to drink. To everyone's surprise, Will begins walking towards Stagnate, his eyes locked on the goblet. But just as he nears, Will grabs the demon blade overeater and, with a swift motion, chops off Stagnate's arm. Magical thorns sprout from the sword, binding the god in place. Will slashes at him again, and his wounds begin to heal as the life-steal effect kicks in. However, before Will can deliver the final blow, a snake silently slithers up behind him, wrapping around his legs and biting him. Will tries to resist but soon collapses, unconscious. He awakens in a calm, serene realm that feels strangely familiar, though he can't remember why. As he takes in his surroundings, a beautiful woman approaches him, and he suddenly realizes that she is Graceful, the goddess of light and rebirth, the very deity who had escorted him to this world when he first arrived. Graceful asks Will why he rejected Stagnate's offer. Will, after reflecting for a moment, replies that his previous life had been filled with suffering and emptiness. He refuses to let that happen again. He wants to live a meaningful life in this world, and without death, life would lose all its value. More than anything, he wants to protect his family. Impressed by his resolve, Graceful smiles and grants him her divine grace. She tells him to wake up, take an oath in her name, and walk alongside her forever. Suddenly, Will wakes back up on the battlefield. Quickly, he removes the snake from his leg and falls to his knees in prayer. He takes an oath to Graceful, the goddess of light and rebirth, vowing to dedicate his life to her. Stagnate, watching from a distance, laughs mockingly, telling Will that his prayer is useless. But as Will's body ignites in blue flames, Stagnate's confidence wavers. Realizing that Will has been blessed by the goddess, the evil god begins to panic. Will, empowered by divine flames, grabs his sword and boldly declares that he will dedicate his life to his goddess, banish the evil, and save the suffering. Furious, Stagnate orders his forces to kill Will, but with one powerful slash of his sword, Will invokes the power of the divine torch. The blue flames envelop the undead demons, peacefully sending their souls to the afterlife. Will charges towards Stagnate with his acceleration spell, but the god quickly jumps away, disappearing in a cloud of dust magic. Will remains on high alert, scanning for the god's next move, but suddenly, Graceful gives him a divine signal. Stagnate isn't targeting him anymore. Realizing that the god must have headed back to the temple to harm Blood and Mary, Will wastes no time. He uses his acceleration spell again, rushing toward the temple, his heart pounding with the hope of getting there in time to save his family and guide them back into the cycle of rebirth. When he bursts into the temple, Will finds Gus restrained, while Blood is standing protectively in front of Mary as Stagnate looms over them. Will knows he won't reach them in time to stop Stagnate. But just when it seems too late, a bright light floods the temple, forcing Stagnate back. Mater, the goddess of earth, appears, revealing herself to protect Mary, her loyal follower, whom she had forgiven long ago. This divine intervention gives Will the opening he needs. Without hesitation, he uses the divine torch on Mary and Blood, hoping to send them peacefully back into the cycle of rebirth. He fully expects Stagnate to intervene and stop him, and sure enough, Stagnate counters the divine flames with his own attack. However, Blood seizes the moment and strikes at Stagnate from behind. Although Stagnate dodges, the distraction is all Will needs. He accelerates toward the god at lightning speed. Stagnate attempts to cast a spell, but Gus, free from his restraints, counters it instantly. Will closes the distance and, with a powerful thrust of his demon blade, Overeater pins Stagnate against the wall. Fueled by the grace of Graceful, Will unleashes a relentless barrage of attacks, combining the sword's power with the goddess's divine strength. In a final, overwhelming strike, Will eliminate Stagnate once and for all. Exhausted, Will collapses to the floor, panting heavily. Gus, Blood, and Mary rush to his side, asking if he's alright. Gus, smiling proudly, congratulates Will, telling him how much stronger he's become. There's a sense of happiness and relief among them all, and Gus suggests they celebrate tonight. However, just as Blood and Mary try to stand up to join the celebration, they both fall back to the ground. Concerned, Will asks if something is wrong, but they already seem to know what's happening. Blood and Mary explain that because Stagnate is dead, their contract with him is broken. This means they will soon die as well, finally able to pass on into the cycle of rebirth. Will is horrified and begins to cry, not wanting to lose them. He pleads for another way to save them, but Blood and Mary smile gently, reassuring him. They tell him that this is not something to be sad about. They are finally free to move on and experience rebirth. Mary softly reminds him not to be selfish. They have raised him well, and this is their time to rest. With tears streaming down his face, Will protests, but they both tell him that while his future may not be easy, he must strive to live a good and happy life, no matter the challenges he faces. As Will watches, the spirits of Blood and Mary slowly leave their bodies, transforming into what they once looked like in life. Their features, once undead and lifeless, become youthful and vibrant again. Gus returns with a bottle of vintage alcohol, and they all share one final celebration in honor of Will's coming of age. Despite the bittersweet moment, they laugh and reminisce as Blood and Mary prepare to pass on. When the time comes, Will prays for them, and Graceful guides their souls into the cycle of rebirth, granting them peace. The next day, Will buries their bodies on a hilltop overlooking the temple, speaking softly to them. He promises to embark on his journey soon and assures them that he will visit as often as possible. As Will finishes, Gus approaches him from behind. Will, puzzled, asks why Gus is still alive, wondering why he hasn't passed on as well. Gus explains that since he hadn't fully broken his contract with Stagnate, he has around 10 years left before his time comes. During those years, he will guard the seal of the High King until Will becomes strong enough to handle it. Before Will can respond, Gus tosses a heavy sack of treasure at him, telling him to use it as he sees fit. Gus has no need for it, but Will definitely need the funds for his travels. Grateful, Will thanks him and returns to his room one last time. He packs his bag, dresses for the road, and takes a deep breath as he prepares to leave the temple, the only home he's ever known. Gus walks with him to the edge of the road, where they say their farewells. But before parting, Gus tells Will that he'll need a last name and, with a smile, names him Will G. Meriblood, honoring his undead family. With a final nod of thanks, Will sets off on his journey. As he travels through the dense forest, he encounters demons, defeating them easily with the skills he has honed over the years. Along the way, he lives off the preserved food he brought with him, but there's no sign of any humans. His hope lifts when he finally finds a settlement, but his excitement quickly fades when he discovers it's an abandoned city, devoid of life. Will walks down to the river running through the city and prays to Graceful, asking her to return the souls of those who once lived there to the cycle of life. The next day, he follows the stream deeper into the jungle, determined to find any sign of human life. As he walks, a wild boar suddenly charges at him from the bushes. Will, quick on his feet, defeats it in a single blow. But when he inspects the boar, he realizes it was already hit by an arrow, meaning someone else is nearby. Before Will can react, the man who shot the boar steps out of the shadows, bow drawn and aimed directly at Will. Trying to think of a way to avoid a fight, Will notices the archer's features and realizes that he's an elf. In a calculated move, Will greets him in ancient Elvish. The archer seems surprised, lowering his weapon slightly. He introduces himself as Meneldor and, with a slightly irritated tone, tells Will that the boar was supposed to be his kill. Meneldor, impressed by Will's actions in finishing off the boar, agrees to share some of the meat with him. They work together to butcher and cook the boar, and just before they eat, Will begins to pray to the gods. Meneldor, who doesn't seem to be a believer, smirks at Will's devotion but says nothing. After their meal, Will asks Meneldor for directions, explaining that he's an adventurer who got lost in the southern ruins. Meneldor informs him of a town downstream, and Will thanks him. However, when Will asks if they could travel together, Meneldor flatly refuses, warning Will not to follow him under any circumstances. Summoning a group of fairies with his magic, Meneldor lights his path and disappears into the forest. That night, Will sets up camp, lights a fire, and prepares to sleep. During his slumber, Graceful enters his dream, showing him ominous visions of Meneldor's village under attack. Startled, Will wakes up with a jolt, fearing for Meneldor's safety. He quickly traces Meneldor's footsteps through the forest to warn him of the impending danger. Will eventually reaches a village and sees a few humans walking around, seemingly unaware of any immediate threat. However, his instincts flare as he senses an attack coming. Will rushes in front of the villagers, shielding them from incoming arrows, only to realize that Meneldor himself is the one attacking. Meneldor shoots more arrows at Will, but Will blocks them, and the two guards sound the alarm, alerting the village. Forced to retreat, Meneldor and his gang make a hasty escape into the forest. Will accelerates after them, and Meneldor uses his fairy magic to trip and burn Will. However, Will powers through with brute force, eventually catching up to Meneldor. With a powerful strike to the gut, Will knocks Meneldor down and quickly uses his web magic to capture the rest of the attackers. As the villagers gather around the scene, tensions rise. One villager thanks Will for saving them and explains that this area is known as the Beast Woods, a region largely populated by outlaws. The attackers, however, were from a neighboring village, with whom they had been on good terms, leaving them baffled as to why they were being raided. The village chief arrives, thanking Will for his help. After receiving Will's assurance that he will protect them again if needed, the chief prepares to interrogate the raiders to learn their true motive. As morning breaks, Will discovers that Meneldor's village was destroyed by demons, leaving the survivors with nothing. Out of desperation, they had resorted to raiding nearby villages to survive. Meneldor, taking full responsibility, confesses that the raid was his idea and asks that only he be punished. Sympathetic but firm, the village chief orders Meneldor's execution. Before the execution can proceed, Will steps forward, offering to compensate for the raiders' crimes using the treasure Gus had given him. He explains that his goddess, Graceful, teaches kindness and second chances. After some deliberation, the village chief agrees to Will's proposal, and the raiders are spared. The chief also agrees to provide shelter for the surviving members of Meneldor's village, who hadn't participated in the attack. Meneldor, though humbled, remains conflicted as Will's mercy spares his life. After their conversation, Will hires Meneldor to lead him to the demons hiding in the ruins of Meneldor's village. Meneldor, though still skeptical of Will's naive belief in defeating the demons, agrees, calling him a fool but quietly grateful for his help. Thanks to Meneldor's exceptional tracking skills and his use of fairy magic, they soon arrive at the ruined village, which is blanketed in a thick mist, making it eerie and unsettling. Meneldor scouts the area and reports that the demons are gathered at the temple, performing a sacrificial ritual. Will, however, feels confident that these demons won't pose much of a threat. With stealth, Will sneaks into the temple, dispatching one of the demons conducting the ritual with a swift strike. He then traps a fearsome creature, a manticore, using his web magic, quickly eliminating the other demon present. Meneldor, not one to be left out, joins the battle outside, taking down the guards with ease. Once the threats are dealt with, the two search the village for any survivors. They find none, and will solemnly praise for the dead, asking Graceful to guide their souls to the next life. Meneldor, witnessing Will's genuine devotion and selflessness, softens. He apologizes to Will, admitting that he had misjudged him. Earlier, he had assumed Will was just some arrogant rich kid blessed by the gods. Now, he sees that Will's actions are driven by kindness and a deep sense of duty. Grateful for the help, Meneldor leads Will to meet his adoptive grandmother, who had turned into a high-ranking ghost. Initially, Will is apprehensive, fearing that she might be a powerful opponent. However, to his surprise, Meneldor's grandmother is fully in control of herself and has no intention of resisting them. The moment she sees Meneldor, she scolds him lightly, noticing he's been naughty. Overcome with emotion, Meneldor breaks down, admitting his frustration and helplessness in not being able to protect his village. He vents his feelings to her, expressing his guilt and hopelessness. His grandmother, however, encourages him, telling him that life has given him another chance, especially now that he has Will, a priest and friend, by his side. Her words give Meneldor a glimmer of hope. Before departing, she turns to Will, offering valuable information about another demon hideout deep in the forests. With that, she passes on peacefully, a true warrior in spirit, a Sigma granny, leaving behind both her wisdom and her love for her grandson. Later, as the villagers return to find their homes in ruins, Meneldor takes Will to a quiet spot to open up about his past. He reveals that his mother was in love with a human, which made him a half-blood elf. After her death, he ran away from his village because the other elves constantly bullied him for his mixed heritage. He eventually became an adventurer but was betrayed by a teammate, leaving him lost and alone. That was when he stumbled upon this village, where he met a kind woman who took him in and set him on the right path. However, because elves age much slower than humans, Meneldor stayed looking like a teenager while the woman aged into a grandmother. Sometimes, this left him feeling lonely. After sharing this emotional story, Meneldor abruptly switches to a more serious tone and asks Will to bless him as Graceful's priest and allow him to become her devotee. Will, caught off guard by the sudden shift, agrees and blesses him. With the blessing done, they head back to the village where the locals are throwing a party to celebrate their victory and the restoration efforts. The next day, the villagers start planning to rebuild their homes but realize they need to visit the city of Whitesail to gather supplies. Curious, Will asks about the city, and Meneldor is shocked by Will's lack of knowledge. He explains that Whitesail is the largest city in the southern region of the Fertile Kingdom and has been ever since the war between the human heroes and the High King 200 years ago. Will decides he wants to visit Whitesail, but before setting out, he plans to explore the nearby ruins to gather some funds for the village's restoration. After a successful mission, as Will and Meneldor return, they spot two people being chased by a large, aggressive gorilla-like creature, Haram's cousin. Without hesitation, Will steps in to protect them, remembering what Blood taught him about intimidating beasts before engaging in a fight. Using his death stare, Will successfully frightens the beast away. The girl he saved is ecstatic, introducing herself as Rabina, a traveling halfling bard, while her companion, Antonio, is a traveling merchant. Meneldor introduces himself and Will, and the duo explains they were on their way to Whitesail when their guards abandoned them after seeing the gorilla. Seeing an opportunity, Meneldor strikes a deal. He and Will escort Rabina and Antonio safely to Whitesail in exchange for help in getting a discount on the supplies the villagers need. Excited by the offer of traveling with a warrior priest, Rabina and Antonio agree. As they journey together, they pass through various villages, where Rabina entertains the locals with her songs, attracting large crowds. Antonio sets up his shop, selling goods along the way. He even suggests that Will use his healing abilities to help people, spreading the good name of Graceful while also drawing more customers to Antonio's shop. One night, as the group rests in an empty shed, Rabina sings a song about Blood, Mary, and Gus. Will eagerly listens to hear an immortal tale about his family's heroism from years before they became legends. Rabina recounts a story of the trio saving a half-elf girl who was chosen as a sacrifice for a wyvern terrorizing her village. The girl's boyfriend, desperate to save her, offered all the money he had to hire them. The trio accepted the quest, slayed the wyvern, and, in a gesture of kindness, gave the couple a dagger and some money to help them start a new life. At first, the couple hesitated to accept the gifts, but the wandering sage, Gus, assured them it was an investment and that he expected them to grow famous and wealthy. One day, he joked he would return to collect this sum with interest. To seal the deal, he gave them a secret password, revealing his true name, which was known to only a few. The song ends there, but Rabina adds that the family of Count Dagger, the descendants of that couple, still have an old half-elf woman who has been waiting for someone to come collect the wandering sage's debt. Will, emotional and moved by the tale, is deeply touched. He cries, hoping to meet the old woman someday, knowing it would connect him to his family's past in a meaningful way. The next morning, the group enjoys breakfast before heading off toward Whitesail. Upon reaching the city, Will is awestruck by the magnificent sight before him. Antonio explains that Whitesail is governed by the Crown Prince Eel, and the city is known for its advanced policies, fashion, street lights powered by magic, and public baths run by magicians. After a relaxing sauna and cold bath, the group eats at a local restaurant and then makes their way to the Grand Temple, where Will intends to pay his respects to Graceful. Will enters the temple alone, admiring its beauty until he encounters a junior priest. He informs the priest of his intention to offer a prayer to Graceful, but the priest, though respectful, explains that because Graceful is considered a minor deity, they must conduct a faith verification to ensure that no evil god's minions disguise themselves as her followers. The junior priest apologetically informs Will that all high-ranking priests are currently away on various assignments, and the verification might take some time. Will, understanding, prepares to leave when Bart, the bishop of the temple, arrives. Bart, irritable and foul-mouthed, intimidates the junior priest but takes an immediate interest in Will. Despite his gruff manner, Bart is impressed by the lessons Will has learned from Graceful, and allows him to pray without going through the verification process. As the junior priest leads Will to the chapel, he grumbles about Bart, calling him vain and immoral. Will, however, remains focused, grateful for the chance to honor his goddess despite the odd encounter. When Will returns to the guest house at the church, his friends also have bad things to say about Bart, calling him a vulgar old man who often resorts to bribery and intimidation to get his way. Just as they are discussing the bishop's shady reputation, the city's warning bells ring out, interrupting their conversation. Will looks outside to see a wyvern attacking the city, plunging it into chaos. Fires rage, and the church quickly fills with injured people. The entire city is on edge. Unable to stand by, Will rushes to the rooftop, desperate to help. From his vantage point, he sees the soldiers struggling to fight the wyvern using catapults, but the creature is too fast and powerful, easily destroying their posts. As Will watches the city burn, he feels a deep anger swell within him, knowing that all the peace his parents fought to establish is being undone by this wyvern. In his fury, he attacks with a lightning bolt, but misses. Growing desperate, he tries again, but his reckless efforts yield no results. Just then, Meneldor arrives and scolds Will, telling him to calm down and think things through. Will regains his composure and remembers the lessons his parents taught him. Instead of attacking blindly, he formulates a plan. He asks Meneldor to use his fairy magic to support him with a long-range wind spell. Will combines it with his own lightning-imbued spiderweb, and together they launch their combined attack, sending a powerful shock through the wyvern and restraining it in the web. The wyvern, though shocked and entangled, manages to break free, more aggressive than before. It turns its attention to Will and charges. With quick thinking, Will calls upon Graceful's grace to create a giant barrier around the temple, blocking the wyvern's fiery breath. However, the barrier shatters when the creature strikes it with its miasma-covered claws. Meneldor uses his wind magic to knock the wyvern to the ground, and Will seizes the opportunity to bind it with magic chains. Unfortunately, the wyvern tears through the chains with ease. Undeterred, Will accelerates toward the beast, stabbing it with all his might. Yet the wyvern refuses to die, preparing to launch a final, devastating attack on the temple. Will, running out of options, remembers what Blood once told him: when all else fails, brute force can sometimes be the answer. With renewed resolve, Will leaps at the wyvern, wrapping his arms around its massive neck. Using all his strength, he slams the creature to the ground and, with sheer force, snaps its neck. As Will stands up, panting after the battle, he notices the people in the temple staring at him in stunned silence. For a moment, no one speaks, but then Antonio and Rubina step forward, rallying the crowd. They declare Will the new hero, the Wyvern Slayer, and the people erupt in cheers, celebrating his victory. Will, though humbled by the attention, feels a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing he protected the city just as his parents once did. After slaying the wyvern, Will is clearing rubble when a priest arrives, informing him that Prince Ethel has summoned him. Will and Meneldor visit the prince, who wants to discuss their wyvern-slaying party. The prince assumes the roles of warrior, magician, fairy user, and priest are spread among them, but Will surprises him by revealing that he handles 3 of those roles, while Meneldor is the fairy user. Ethel is astonished and becomes serious, demanding details. After hearing Will's account, the prince thanks him and asks what reward he desires. Will requests help in subjugating the demons in the south. However, the prince refuses, stating it's too far and he can't spare forces. Will then proposes assembling and funding a private mercenary army to deal with the demons. Ethel, shocked, says Will could be killed for overstepping his bounds. Will, realizing the danger, decides to be honest, saying it's his duty as Graceful's priest to march into darkness and save the suffering. Impressed by Will's determination, the prince listens, but before the matter continues, Bishop Bart barges in, accusing the prince of overstepping temple authority by summoning a priest. Bart is left speechless when he learns of Will's request to form a private army to liberate the Beast Woods. Ethel then announces his plan to appoint Will as a paladin and suggests joint custody with the temple. Bart, surprised, withdraws with Will to consider the proposal. On their way back, Meneldor picks a fight with Bishop Bart, while Will tries to console Bart's adoptive daughter, Anna. She reassures Will that despite her father's harsh exterior, he is a good man at heart. Later, Will meets Bart in the temple and learns that Bart never uses his divine grace, explaining that he often needs to commit immoral acts, like bribery and intimidation, for the greater good of the land. He refuses to defile his god's blessings with such actions. Will, gaining some respect for Bart's complicated position, listens as the bishop tries to dissuade him from his mission to save the Beast Woods. However, Will remains steadfast in his oath to Graceful. Bart, impressed by Will's unwavering devotion, grants him permission to proceed. Determined, Will goes to a local pub to recruit adventurers, hoping to attract glory hunters willing to fight for less money and more fame. His reputation as the Wyvern Slayer draws a crowd, but many are disappointed by the low rewards for the mission. However, a rugged veteran adventurer named Rov recognizes that Will is looking for those who are willing to risk it all for pride. When Rov learns that Will's goal is to defeat the demons in the south, he finds the challenge thrilling and joins the mission, bringing his party with him. Soon after, Will is knighted by Prince Ethel, becoming a paladin. He swears loyalty to the gods and vows to save the weak. Will, now leading a ragtag team of adventurers, also receives help from Antonio to fund the development of the Beastwoods villages. Bart sends several priests, including Anna, to support Will in the months ahead. In the following weeks, Will and his companions scout the forests, defeat demons, mediate disputes between villagers, and lead the community to prosperity. One day, Rov reports that a scouting party has been missing for too long. Will quickly assembles Meneldor, Rov, and his team to investigate. They find the scouts' dead bodies and the giant footprint of a demon. While searching for survivors, they follow clues that suggest one man ran deep into the valley. However, they soon realize it was a trap, as demon beasts surround them on all sides. The group forms up for battle, with Will and Meneldor using their magic to buff their allies. As they hold off the beasts, a massive chimera appears on the cliff above them. Meneldor tries to attack it with earth magic but is struck down, suffering serious injuries. The chimera unleashes dark fire, burning Meneldor, and Will, screaming in desperation, tries to save his friend. Will casts a lightning spell, but a snake-like beast interrupts him, causing the spell to backfire and hit him instead. Fried by his own magic, Will falls to his knees in despair. In a fit of rage, he slices through the snake with his demon sword, Overeater, and goes berserk, slaughtering the beasts without regard for his own safety. The sword's lifesteal ability heals him as he fights, but Will becomes consumed by his anger, destroying every monster in sight. It isn't until Rov snaps him out of it, urging him to save Meneldor, that Will regains control. Rushing to Meneldor's side, Will weeps as he heals his friend's burnt body, but the exertion causes Will to lose consciousness. When Will wakes up in the village, Rov informs him that the chimera fled and that they had retreated. Meneldor is alive but remains in a coma, and Rov forbids Will from visiting him until he recovers. As Will rests, he reflects on his failure, realizing that he had overestimated everyone's abilities, including Meneldor's. In the rain, Will walks toward Meneldor's room, healing him once more as he contemplates his idealized vision of friendship. He realizes that he had subconsciously forced the ideal of having companions like his parents onto Meneldor, nearly getting him killed in the process. Determined to never let this happen again, Will resolves that he will no longer rely on others and vows to save everyone and everything by himself. As soon as Will leaves Meneldor's room, Meneldor wakes up and realizes that his friend had been there. Determined to confront him, Meneldor chases after Will and finds him in the forest.
Come here, you bastard!
Will coldly tells him that he plans to defeat the demons alone and doesn't need anyone's help. Furious with Will's attitude, Meneldor attacks him, but his strikes barely make Will flinch. Wanting to stop his friend's futile struggle, Will breaks one of Meneldor's arms, hoping it would make him stop, but Meneldor refuses to give up. Despite the pain, he uses his fairy magic to launch rocks at himself, forcing Will to block them with his body to protect his friend. Will falls to his knees, and Meneldor kicks him in the gut, calling him a coward. Meneldor declares that as his friend, it's his duty to stop Will from doing something foolish out of frustration. Will, emotional and ashamed, apologizes. Meneldor helps him to his feet, promising that one day he'll grow strong enough not to be a burden. After patching things up, they return to the village and begin preparing for their second attempt at defeating the Chimera. This time, they plan thoroughly. Will, Meneldor, and the rest of the group head back to the valley, ready for battle. They fight the beasts with precision, firing fire arrows, blocking with shields, and finishing them off with spears. After defeating all the smaller beasts in their way, Will and Meneldor reach an abandoned monastery ahead of the others. Thinking they're safe to proceed, Will suddenly senses something amiss. Using his nullifying magic, he reveals the Chimera, which had been hiding itself by turning invisible. The discovery shocks them as they realize that this isn't just an ordinary beast. The Chimera is an intelligent monster, created through demonic rituals. Its goal is clear: to keep the South devastated and prevent humans from reclaiming the land. Now aware of the Chimera's true purpose, Will and Meneldor brace themselves for the most difficult battle they've faced yet. With the Chimera defeated, Will and Meneldor realize the bigger threat. The demon's ultimate plan is to claim the city of the dead and free their High King. The Chimera, sensing its time running out, launches a surprise attack at Will, but he dodges and strikes at its head. The beast charges, but Will summons a barrier, blocking the attack, and stabs it from the sides. Meneldor uses his magic to trap the Chimera in the ground, and the two coordinate their strikes. They hit the Chimera from both sides, causing it to lose control of its multiple heads. As Will stabs from one side, Meneldor channels wind magic into his arrow and blasts off its tail. In a final desperate move, the Chimera releases a dark miasma, growing in size. Will tells Meneldor to support him from the rear while he takes the front, knowing he has poison immunity. He charges forward, bashing the dark flames spewing from the Chimera's mouths with his shield. Meneldor, acting quickly, blasts the Chimera into the air with his wind magic. Will seizes the moment, stabbing one head from below before leaping into the air to deliver a finishing blow to the final head. With the Chimera slain, Will and Meneldor prepare to face the boss demon inside the monastery. However, when they enter, they discover that Rav has already taken care of the demon while they were fighting the Chimera. The victory feels bittersweet, but they all return to the village, which soon becomes more lively as the news spreads that the threat of the beasts has been dealt with. As they rest, Meneldor informs Will that with the danger gone, more people will soon come to settle in the Beast Woods. He also teases Will, suggesting that he might become the new lord of the area. Will, confused, asks what he means, and Meneldor laughs, calling him dumb. Meneldor explains that Will has divine protection, the backing of Prince Ethel and the church, and the respect of the people, making it inevitable that he will become the new lord of the Beast Woods. Panic briefly sets in as Will realizes the weight of the responsibility, but he quickly gathers himself, deciding that with the support of his friends, he can handle it. With a new dream taking shape, Will envisions reviving the city of the dead and one day visiting the graves of his parents, fulfilling his promise to protect the land they once saved. 2 years pass, and Will, now a dashing 17-year-old, has successfully developed the Beastwood area and become its lord. He resides in the capital city of Torchport, also known as the Port of Light, which was established in the first abandoned city Will had discovered when he left his childhood home. One day, as Will is working on some papers, he has recently patented a new manufacturing process for paper. Meneldor enters his office. The two take a walk through the bustling city, and Will shares his vision of the future with his friend. Instead of focusing on cutting down trees and selling lumber, Will plans to build a paper industry in the Beast Woods, ensuring long-term profitability for his territory. As winter approaches, Will decides to take Rabina on a casual outing, though strictly as friends. Rabina, excited, asks him to take her to the Academy of Mages, a place she's always wanted to visit. The academy is located in the Forbidden Lands, where non-magicians are typically not allowed. Despite the risks, Will, being a skilled magician himself, agrees to help his halfling friend sneak in. When they enter the forest surrounding the academy, Will quickly realizes it is filled with powerful magical wards and traps. Initially, he considers giving up on sneaking in.
Don't nobody understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, man.
Not wanting to put Rabina in danger. However, he suggests they could try the front door and ask for permission to enter. Navigating the forest proves to be tricky, as magic has been cast over it to confuse outsiders. After walking in circles for a while, Will figures out the trick and uses his magic to reveal the true path. As they walk along the path, they come across a warning carved into a tree: learn or leave. Rabina, anxious upon reading the warning, suggests they turn back. She recalls hearing stories about how even the legendary wandering sage, Gus, couldn't enter the academy without help from his master when he was young. This is the first time Will has heard this part of Gus's story, but he presses on, curious to learn more. Further along the way, they encounter an old, disheveled man sitting by a fire. Will and Rabina introduce themselves, and the man reveals that he is the lowly groundskeeper of the academy. Humble and unassuming, he insists that his name is not worthy to be shared with a paladin like Will. The old man invites them to rest by the fire, explaining that only magicians are allowed entry to the academy, but he still hopes they might receive permission to visit for a short while. The old man offers them some cheese to roast over the fire. While they eat, he asks Will to demonstrate his magic, curious about the famed paladin. Will responds that his master's teachings forbid using magic for mere show. The old man then tries to be clever, asking Will to dry out some firewood dampened by the snow. Will, thinking quickly, simply moves the wet wood closer to the already burning fire to dry it. The old groundkeeper is impressed by Will's ingenuity and starts asking both of them about their thoughts on magic. Rabina shares that she believes magic should be used to create happiness for everyone, and she's always seen Will use it for that purpose. The old man, impressed by their answers, decides they are worthy to see the academy. Suddenly, a bright light shines behind him. When it subsides, Will and Rabina find themselves standing at the gates of the academy. The old man is now well-groomed and introduces himself as Professor Hyam, the Master of the Woods. He makes an exception for them to enter the academy and asks Rabina what she would like to see. They are taken on a tour of the academy, and Rabina eagerly asks to visit the library. Professor Hyam leads them there, granting them permission to read anything on the floor. Rabina searches the shelves until she finds 2 heavy books, which Will helps her carry. One is a list of the academy's graduates, and the other contains historical records of the area. Rabina studies the books until evening, and they both thank Hyam before leaving. On the way back, Will asks Rabina why she was so focused on those particular books. Rabina tells him about a beautiful and kind magician she once traveled with. It was one of the best times of her life, but they eventually parted ways due to different destinations. Soon after, Rabina learned her magician friend had died heroically, defending a town from demons, though no stories of her bravery survived. Rabina now wants to learn all she can about her friend's actions and write a song that will ensure her memory lives on. She ends her story with a smile, saying that songs of heroes carry hope, and that's why she will write one for her fallen friend. Will, touched by her determination, asks her to sing the song for him once it's finished. He quietly hopes that, even if he dies one day, his own story might be preserved in song as well. Months pass, and one day Will receives a report of winter flowers blooming in the summer. The prince takes the anomaly seriously and orders Will to investigate. Will and Meneldor head into the forest and find animals killed brutally. Meneldor senses the forest is out of balance, and Will, though doubtful, listens and prepares to find the source of the issue. Meneldor explains that the Lord of Oak rules the forest in winter, and the Lord of Holly rules in summer, with authority changing during the solstice. Since the summer solstice passed days ago, Holly should have taken over, but Oak still holds power. They visit the Lord of Oak, an ancient tree with a face, and ask why the authority hasn't been transferred. Oak reveals that Holly refuses to accept the transfer. Meneldor volunteers to act as the messenger and transfer the authority manually. Oak warns him that his soul will be destroyed within a month, but Meneldor, deeply connected to the forest, insists he will handle it with Will's help. Oak sends Meneldor on a trial to prove his worth, and Will, unable to interfere in the trial, waits patiently for his friend's return. Meneldor returns a few days later, looking slightly roughed up but showing Will the mark of royal authority on the back of his hand. Without delay, the two head towards the holly tree. As they approach, they encounter 2 demons blocking their path. They quickly defeat one each and realize these were mere gatekeepers, and the real challenge lies ahead. Crossing a giant stone gate, they find the Lord of Holly, a massive tree shrouded in a creepy mist. As they near the tree, a demon general awaits them. The general, aware of the faraway paladin Will, and Meneldor, known as Swiftwings, declares his intent to gain glory by hunting them. He summons demonic beasts to attack. As the beasts close in, Meneldor completes the transfer of royal authority to the holly tree. With its newfound power, the Lord of Holly uses its roots to drag the beasts underground, neutralizing them instantly. Furious, the demon general tries to recite a spell, but Will charges in, interrupting the chant, causing the magic to explode in the demon's face. Will attacks with his spear, and the demon blocks, but Will overwhelms him with brute strength, slashing him down to his knees before delivering the final blow to the head. With the demon general defeated, the Lord of Holly thanks them and uses its power to rejuvenate the forest. Trees sprout fresh leaves, and lakes fill up. Holly then reveals an unexpected truth to Meneldor. Because he temporarily held the royal authority of the forest, the ancient blood in him has awakened. One day, Meneldor could become a ruler of the forest and transform into an old bearded tree, just like Holly. Both Meneldor and Will are stunned, having never realized the implications of their actions. Holly reassures Meneldor that the transformation won't happen immediately, and that he can choose to refuse, but urges him to think carefully about his future. Before they leave, the Lord of Holly gives Will a grim prediction. In the Rust Mountains to the west, the fire of black calamity will soon break out, threatening to consume the entire land. Holly warns that the Rust Mountains are home to the Lord of Hellfire, and Miasma, a powerful demon who hoards treasures and sleeps upon them. With a final warning to prepare for this dangerous threat, the Lord of Holly ends the conversation, leaving Will with much to consider. Later, Will and Meneldor visit Prince Ethel, who tries to flatter Will for his recent accomplishments while subtly cutting down on rewards. Meneldor, unimpressed with the prince's sweet words, speaks frankly to negotiate for higher rewards. Just then, Bishop Bard arrives, out of breath, and the four sit at the table. Will and Meneldor give a detailed report of their findings in the forest, including the warning from the Lord of Holly. The prince facepalms, realizing they are facing one calamity after another. Meanwhile, Meneldor and Bart quarrel over whether the prophecy of an old tree can be trusted. Moving past the argument, Bart explains that the Rust Mountains were once the capital of a dwarf kingdom that fell to demons, who still occupy the region. Will, hearing this, gets excited, imagining he can go there and rampage freely since there are no bystanders. The prince laughs, glad that Will is eager for the task, but Bart and Meneldor remain more cautious. The prince advises Will to first gather information about the Rust Mountains before taking action. Will and Meneldor visit Robina to see if she knows any stories about the area. Robina shares that 200 years ago, the Rust Mountains were known as the Iron Mountains, the capital of the powerful Iron Kingdom of Dwarves. When the demon army invaded, the dwarves fought back valiantly, but nearly all of them perished. The mountains turned red with blood and rust, and the surviving dwarves who fled faced extreme hardship. Few remain today, and no songs or stories from the Iron Mountains survived the catastrophe. Will decides to seek out the dwarves living in Torchport for more information. Meneldor leads him through a shortcut in the forest, thanks to the temporary authority he gained from the forest trial. He mentions that centuries from now, he may have to decide his future path. By then, Will have passed away, but Meneldor plans to live long enough to see Will's great-grandchildren. He explains that hybrids like him, between the Fae and humans, eventually face a life-altering choice: to remain mortal and die at an old age, or to become immortal and one with nature. Meneldor wants to witness all of Will's achievements before making his decision. Thanks to Meneldor's newfound abilities, they arrive at Torchport in hours instead of days. In the city, they meet with Antonio, who tells them about dwarf immigrants who arrived half a year ago. They were lost, broken, and so glum that many of the locals were opposed to letting them stay. Antonio tells Will that the dwarves are now well settled, and their leader might have useful knowledge about the Rust Mountains. Will recalls Gus's teachings about the Fae, beings who could either remain tied to nature as forest lords or live among humans in mortal bodies. The Fae who followed the goddess of wind and forest became elves, while those devoted to the god of fire and craft became dwarves. Renowned for their craftsmanship and bravery, dwarves were highly respected, even by blood. The next morning, while Will trains with Meneldor, he notices someone watching them from a distance. When Will approaches to greet the observer, he's surprised to find a jittery dwarf who, after Meneldor speaks to him in a brusque tone, flees immediately. Later, Will heads to the dwarven settlement and is impressed by their hard work. Upon seeing their lord, the dwarves stop their tasks to offer him respect. Will eventually meets Agnar, the dwarves' leader, and his elderly uncle, Grenier. Over tea, Will asks why they came to Beastwood. Grenier bluntly replies, "We came here to find peace in our last days." Will, caught off guard by the grim response, nearly chokes on his tea. Agnar takes over the conversation, explaining that Grenier is one of the few remaining survivors of the Iron Mountains and has lived with a heavy heart for many years. Grenier becomes emotional, reminiscing about the glory of his homeland and the dreams he once had of reclaiming it. Now too old to pursue those dreams, he hopes at least to ensure peace for the younger dwarves. He earnestly asks Will to protect them. Moved by the request, Will takes Grenier's hands and vows to keep them safe and prosperous. Grenier, tearful, thanks Will before recounting the fall of the Iron Mountains. 2 centuries ago, the Iron Mountains were ruled by a wise and powerful dwarf king. Under his leadership, the kingdom thrived. However, the High King of Demons eventually arrived with an ultimatum. Either the dwarves joined the demon forces, or they would be destroyed. In defiance, the Dwarf King executed the demon messenger and sent a clear message: the dwarves would never bow to evil. But before his death, the demon warned that an ancient dragon would annihilate them. Knowing the battle ahead would likely be their last, the king prepared his warriors for the coming onslaught. He didn't force anyone to stay, giving everyone the choice to flee. Still, the proud dwarf soldiers chose to stand with him. The king ordered those who were unable to fight to leave and survive, so one day they might return and avenge their fallen homeland. Grenier, who had been a young guard at the time, was tasked with leading civilians to safety. However, many perished on the perilous journey through the mountains, and Grenier has been burdened by survivors' guilt ever since. Hearing the story, Will feels the depth of Grenier's sorrow, struck by the weight of the loss and regret that still haunts the old dwarf. As Will returns from his visit with the dwarves, he comes across a brawl in a nearby inn. The same dwarf who had been spying on him earlier that morning, Rue, is attempting to stop 2 drunk men from fighting, but they gang up on him and knock him out. Will quickly intervenes, and the drunkards flee in terror, leaving behind all their money in the process. Rue soon regains consciousness, clearly nervous, and Will asks him for his name. Rue introduces himself, and Will compliments his toughness. Afterward, Will speaks with the innkeeper about the earlier quarrel, and she explains that her father, who owns the business, is ill, so she has to manage things in his stead. Struggling to handle situations like these, Will offers to heal her father. Grateful, the innkeeper tells him that dinner is on the house. As Will heads back outside, he finds that Rue has already fixed the broken door, impressing everyone with his craftsmanship, though Rue himself lacks confidence. Will and Rue talk, and Rue admits that he's always admired Will. He reveals that he is the prince of the dwarves, but having been raised as a sheltered child, he feels insecure and useless most of the time. Will encourages Rue, telling him that he's already brave and capable, offering to help him in any way he needs. Rue, inspired, asks Will to train him to become a brave warrior. After dinner, Will escorts Rue back to the dwarf settlement, where the other dwarves are anxiously waiting for him. Overprotective, they scold Rue for going out without informing them. Will steps in, apologizing for keeping their prince busy. Suddenly, an old, seasoned dwarf warrior named Gillies steps forward, accepting Will's apology and inquiring about his intentions with Rue. Will explains that he plans to make Rue his aide, causing the dwarves to panic, fearing that their prince will be put in danger. They urge Rue to refuse the offer, but Will tells him that the decision should be his alone. Summoning his courage, Rue declares that he wants to serve Will and become a brave warrior like his ancestors. Tired of being sheltered, he no longer wants to live in fear. Kneeling before Will, Rue swears his loyalty, and Will accepts him as his servant. Turning to the dwarves, Will asks what they plan to do now that their prince has sworn allegiance to him. As confusion spreads through the crowd, Gillies steps forward again, accepting Rue's decision. He reminds everyone that a man should choose his own fate and gives Rue a final lecture on loyalty and sacrifice. He assures Rue that he will speak to Grenier about the situation later. Rue officially becomes Will's new ally, and their first task is to discuss Rue's pay. Though Rue doesn't think much of it, Will, thanks to Gus's lessons, understands that financial stability is essential. He decides to give Rue a fair wage, cover his living expenses, and provide him with proper equipment. The next day, Will begins Rue's training. They run around the city, but Rue, with his short dwarf legs, struggles to keep up. However, his determination shines as he pushes himself to match Will's pace. After that, they move on to strength training, and after a grueling set of pull-ups, Will lets Rue take a break. He then introduces Rue to Meneldor. Nervous at first, Rue calms down after Meneldor apologizes for his earlier rudeness. The following day, Will and Rue train again, this time in freestyle wrestling to test their strength. Rue uses all his might to push Will, but Will's monstrous strength allows him to slam the dwarf to the ground. Instead of being discouraged, Rue is excited and asks Will to teach him the move. Soon after, Will receives a letter from Bishop Bart, informing him that the dragon sleeping in the Rust Mountains is the ancient dragon Vassara. Will recalls Holly's warning, the story of the dwarves, and the chimera he fought, all tied together by this dragon. In mythology, ancient dragons were said to be second only to the gods in power, and even then, they were stronger than the gods' echoes or clones. As Will contemplates the daunting future ahead, he overhears Menildor and Rue training outside. Observing them, Will notices that Rue hesitates every time he gets an opening to hit Menildor, who taunts him to strike harder. Finally, Menildor manages to provoke Rue enough that the dwarf lands a solid blow to Menildor's stomach. Impressed by both Menildor's teaching method and Rue's growth, Will feels proud of their progress. Later, Will sits with Rue to discuss the importance of a balanced diet, and encourages him to finish all the food before him. As they eat, Rue shares his story. Born to royal blood, his parents died when he was young, and he was sheltered by clan elders who sought to protect him. However, he felt that this was not the life a true dwarf should live. It was during that time he first heard the song of the faraway paladin, Will's tale, which inspired him. Rue admits he's been Will's fan ever since, and working under his hero is a dream come true. Rue asks Will to teach him courage, but Will humbly replies that he cannot. He doesn't consider himself particularly brave, explaining that when he fought the wyvern and chimera, he always knew he was stronger than them and would likely win. Later, while Will and Rue are in Will's office, Rav returns from a trip and informs Will that nothing unusual was found. Noticing Rue's slouched posture, Rav immediately steps in to correct it, telling him he looks like a wimp with his bent back. Rue is eager to learn from someone like Rav, a confident veteran, and Rav teaches him how to fake confidence even if he doesn't feel it. Time passes quickly, and autumn brings a bountiful harvest. There's no sign of any calamity from the Rust Mountains, and Rue improves significantly in his training. One day, during a sparring match, Rue successfully slams Will to the ground using a technique Will taught him. Just then, Anna rushes over with a report of undead sightings in the nearby forest. Will decides to investigate personally and takes Rue along, who is now fully equipped in armor. They head west to a place called the Pillar Mound. As they approach, a thick mist surrounds them, and Will realizes it's caused by some sort of magical barrier. When they reach the mound, they see eerie wooden pillars standing in the ground. Rue spots a hooded figure and freezes in fear, but as Will approaches, he discovers it's just a scarecrow, likely placed there to ward off grave robbers. Will prays for the souls of those buried at the mound, and Rue joins him. Rue wonders if the undead might have risen from these graves, but Will explains that properly buried bodies don't turn into undead. Only those left out in the open or those with strong lingering attachments receive the blessing of the god of the undead, Stagnate. Will adds that, in a twisted way, Stagnate is kind. He can't stand to see humans suffer unjust deaths, so he grants them eternal life, but doesn't realize how much harm this causes. Rue, surprised by Will's knowledge of an evil god, asks how he knows so much. Will awkwardly turns away, realizing he's overshared. They conclude that the undead sightings were likely a hallucination caused by the mist, and they head home. On their way back, Will and Rue stumble upon a hidden gate leading to a massive tunnel. Will lights his spear, giving Rue a fire torch as they venture into the dark cave. Eventually, they reach the innermost chamber, where countless graves line the space. Suddenly, a bone-chilling aura fills the air, leaving both Will and Rue momentarily breathless. Steadying himself, Will spots a crow radiating a sinister energy. He instantly recognizes it. This was Stagnate, the god of the undead. The crow greets Will with a cold long time no see. Will, already preparing for a fight, demands to know what Stagnate is doing there. However, Stagnate, not in the mood for combat, reveals he's not here as an echo but merely as a herald delivering a message. Weakened and unable to send another echo for years due to his last defeat, Stagnate confesses that the undead spotted in the area were simply bait to lure Will here. Stagnate assures Will this isn't an act of revenge but admits he came to apologize. He explains that the echo Will fought previously was young and prone to irrational behavior, apologizing for its immature actions. Rue, in shock, listens as the god of the undead apologizes. Stagnate then reveals to Rue that Will had killed his last echo, calling the encounter a mix of intense pain and pleasure for the god. Will, growing impatient, tells Stagnate to get to the point. The crow then shows Will a vision, a dark dragon, overwhelming and terrifying, flashes into his mind. Will falls to his knees, groaning in pain, shivering with fear. Stagnate declares that Will is destined to face the evil dragon Valorca, but warns him that doing so will lead to his doom. The god advises Will to avoid fighting the dragon if he wishes to save his life, even suggesting that will confirm the prophecy with graceful if he doesn't trust an evil god's words. Regaining composure, Will asks why Stagnate is telling him all this. The god replies that he has a fondness for humans, especially heroes. Stagnate doesn't wish for pitiful deaths, and Will, in his eyes, is a hero. Stagnate goes on to explain that he once encountered the evil dragon Valorca during the War of the Gods. Unlike other forces, Valorca fought for thrills and plunder with no sense of morality. The dragon had been a mercenary, working even after the gods had left the world. His final mission was to serve the High King of Demons and conquer the Iron Mountains. While Valorca succeeded in slaughtering the dwarves and seizing the mountain, the wounds he received were so severe that he had been forced into a 2-century-long slumber. Rue is stunned by this revelation and wants to know more about his ancestors. Stagnate, with a twisted sense of irony, laughs, telling Rue to rejoice, for his ancestor, the last king of the dwarves, was a true hero. The king had taken one of Valorca's eyes and fought on equal footing with a being as powerful as the gods. Will is astonished by Stagnate's apparent kindness, not only to him but to Rue as well. Stagnate concludes by predicting that, in time, Will become a greater hero than even the last king of the dwarves and will eventually slay Valorca. However, Stagnate warns that this victory will not come anytime soon, and Will must be patient for the challenges ahead. Just then, the ground trembles, and Stagnate informs Will that the dragon is waking up. He warns Will to get outside immediately. Will and Rue rush back to the Pillar Mound, now overrun with demons. They fight through the horde, with Will covering for Rue, who is still inexperienced. After defeating all the demons, the dragon roars again, shaking the area. Stagnate, perched on a pillar, explains that the roar drives creatures mad with fear, and the demons they just fought were agitated because of it. Another crazed creature approaches. The thunderous footsteps reveal it's a giant. Will guesses correctly as a massive forest giant charges at them. Stagnate watches curiously, wondering what Will do. Will, determined, says he'll subdue the giant without hurting it. He rushes at the giant, blocking its attack before tossing it over his shoulder and knocking it unconscious. Will then uses his blessing to heal the giant's mind. When the giant awakens, it thanks Will in broken speech. Will replies in the giant's language, learning that the giant plans to retreat with its clan to safety. Stagnate expresses his satisfaction with Will's handling of the situation but warns that Will is still not ready to face the dragon. He suggests that avoiding the dragon and letting it rampage for now would give Will time to train and grow stronger, ultimately saving more lives than he would lose if he fought now. With that advice, Stagnate flies away, and Will and Rue return home. Upon returning, they find that the dragon's roar has caused monsters near the city to go mad, leading to destruction. Dealing with the chaos, aiding the injured, and hunting down the maddened creatures takes a significant amount of manpower and time. As the cleanup wraps up, Will receives a letter from Bishop Bart, warning that high-ranking demons have gathered with the dragon. The bishop advises that there is no shame in retreating from battle, urging Will to carefully consider his next move. Conflicted, Will prays to Graceful for guidance, hoping for assurance that he can win and is prepared to die if necessary. Yet, Graceful gives him no sign. Lost in thought, Meneldor enters Will's room, informing him that there's trouble outside. Looking through the window, Will sees a crowd of dwarves gathered. They want to know if the paladin intends to kill the dragon. Rue tries to reason with them, saying this isn't a story like The Hobbit, and urges them to go home. One dwarf tries to barge inside but is swiftly thrown to the ground by Rue. He scolds them, calling them old fools who are too weak to defeat even him, let alone a dragon. Grenier steps forward, grabbing Rue by the collar, and declares that the dwarves are ready to die in battle like their king once did. Rue, enraged by their desire for a pointless death, slams Grenier to the ground. This angers the other dwarves, who rush at Rue, but he fights them all off. Rue tells them they're blinded by pride, wanting a glorious death rather than focusing on winning. He vows that once Will makes his decision, he will join the fight and fight to live, not to die. Rue swears by his royal blood as the grandson of the last dwarf king, leaving the old men stunned by his newfound strength and conviction. Impressed by Rue's determination, Will steps forward to address the dwarves. He declares that he will indeed slay the dragon. Meneldor and Rue immediately volunteer to join him, and Grenier offers to guide them, having seen the Iron Mountains firsthand. Gus interjects, asserting that someone like him is better suited for that role. Just then, Rolf, the veteran adventurer, arrives, eager to join the mission for its glory. Despite knowing their party of 5 stands little chance against the dragon, Will sees that his friends are committed to following him, no matter the odds. Motivated, he rallies his companions, telling them to prepare to face the dragon. Later, Will meets with Rabina, who eagerly claims dibs on writing the story of his battle with the dragon. She wants to turn it into a new song about his heroic feats. Will promises her that he'll tell her the story firsthand before anyone else. Just as Will and Rabina finish their conversation, Antonio comes running up and interrupts their moment. He informs Will that he has prepared all the supplies they need for the mission and asks if there's anything else Will might require. Without hesitation, Will makes a significant request, and Antonio agrees to take care of it. That night, Will dreams of the goddess Graceful. In the dream, he kneels before her, and she tells him that she does not want him to die. Despite her concerns, Will remains resolute about fighting the dragon, believing his oath compels him to defeat such a powerful evil. Unable to argue with him further, Graceful asks him to kneel once more and blesses him, promising that she will always be with him. She tells him to go ahead and slay the dragon, and Will swears upon her life that he will be victorious. The next morning, the group is ready to depart. Antonio whispers in Will's ear, letting him know that he's taken care of the special request. Everyone else bids their farewells, with Anna and Rolf subtly hinting at their romantic feelings for each other. Meneldor promises to share the tale of slaying the dragon with Rabina when they return. After the goodbyes, everyone boards the boat, and the people of Torchport gather to wish their heroes luck. The group makes smooth progress on the water, but later that night, Will spots a campsite on the shore and orders the boat to stop. Rov's party is already waiting for them there, having volunteered to take the more dangerous route ahead. Rue, puzzled, asks Will why they are abandoning their boat so soon. Will explains that the demons are likely waiting for them at the main entrance to the Rust Mountains, where Rov's group will serve as decoys. Will's group will instead use the back route, launching a surprise attack. Antonio had prepared a second boat for them, which was the special request Will had made the previous night. With their plan in place, Will and his team prepare for the next phase of their mission, knowing that the real battle is yet to come. Everyone boards the boat, and Meneldor uses the power of wind fairies to propel them forward at great speed. Their plan requires sailing through the lake near the Dead City where the High King is sealed, a place swarming with undead demons. Rue, though impressed by Will's bold decision, hesitates to tell the group the gravity of their situation. However, Will surprises everyone by casually revealing that he grew up in the Dead City, explaining that he was raised by the 3 legendary heroes and even fought Stagnate's Echo. Meneldor, who considered himself Will's closest friend, sulks at this revelation, upset that Will hadn't shared this story with him first. As dawn approaches, they near the Dead City, and a thick mist covers the surroundings. Will explains that this is Gus's magic, designed to keep intruders out, one of the highest tier spells his teacher can cast. Knowing Gus's methods well, Will quickly decodes the magic and creates a way through the mist, leading them to land at the city's port. Will, overcome with nostalgia, looks at the familiar surroundings of his childhood. Meneldor encourages him not to hesitate, and Will runs ahead to visit his home. He makes a brief stop at his parents' graves before heading to the temple to see Gus. However, when he calls for the ghost, there is no response, and Will begins to worry that Gus may have passed away. Just as he's about to leave, Gus jumps out, playing a prank, and startles Will. Despite the scare, Will is overjoyed to see his grandfather figure again. Gus, being himself, immediately asks if Will has made a lot of money. Disappointed, Will informs him that, though he's become a well-known paladin and the Lord of Beastwood, he hasn't exactly been focused on wealth. Gus is impressed by Will's achievements, but when he hears that Will is still single and a virgin, he's visibly let down. The old ghost teases Will, asking if he hasn't had any chance encounters with beautiful women during his adventures. Will, looking defeated, explains that he's only ever met guys in those situations, which causes Gus to laugh. Will then introduces his friends to Gus and informs him about their mission to fight the evil dragon. Furious, Gus scolds Will, calling him reckless and reminding him that none of them are equipped to defeat the dragon. He even jokes that they don't have enough money to bribe Valerica, making Will's friends realize where his love for money comes from. Gus finishes his lecture by advising Will to stay flexible and not get stuck with only one approach to solving problems. After the scolding, Gus warmly welcomes Will's companions. Meneldor steps forward and tells Gus that, along with Blood and Mary, Gus had once saved his life. Gus remembers Meneldor and comments that he has aged well. Grateful, Meneldor thanks Gus for saving him and for raising such an extraordinary grandson. Gus smiles proudly, but warns them all to be cautious in the dangerous mission ahead. After Will visits his old room, memories flood in, making him feel the weight of nostalgia. He then seeks out Gus for a private conversation, wanting to learn more about the evil dragon by Circa. Gus admits that he never saw the dragon in person. If he had, he would have tried negotiating with him to leave the demon's side and join the heroes. Gus explains that if Will wants to defeat by Circa, he must aim for the dragon's old wounds, as its scales are nearly impenetrable, even for a warrior like Blood. On top of that, ancient dragons like Circa have lived since the Age of Gods, giving them immense magical power. Circa is not only a formidable magic user, but also incredibly fast, massive, and sturdy, making close combat nearly impossible. Hearing this, Will finally understands why Stagnate warned him about facing Circa. Gus, surprised that Stagnate still lingers around Will, throws some shade at the god of the undead but also thanks him for giving Gus the chance to raise a wonderful grandson. Gus asks Will if he's truly certain about fighting the dragon, knowing the risks. Will replies with resolve, if he doesn't defeat the dragon, countless lives will be lost. After discussing the grim reality, the conversation shifts to lighter topics, and Will brings up the story of the three heroes saving a half-elf girl from a wyvern attack. He mentions that the half-elf is still waiting for Gus to collect on the loan they gave her, and Will asks if he can take that money instead. Gus, amused, agrees to let Will claim the loan. Remembering something important, Gus tells Will that the equipment used by the heroes who fought the High King is still in the city, and he offers Will and his friends the chance to take whatever they like. Gus leads them to an empty workshop and uses magic to reveal a hidden door, opening the way to an underground armory. The party is awed by the collection of legendary weapons. Will selects a great shield, believing it can protect him from the dragon's deadly breath. Rav, however, says that trust and compatibility are more important to him than raw performance, so he doesn't want a new weapon. Instead, he asks Gus to engrave magic words on his current sword, giving him an extra skill. Meneldor finds a legendary great bow once used by a famous elven warrior, and chooses it as his weapon. To Gus's surprise, Meneldor turns out to be from the same bloodline as that legendary elf. Rue, excited, picks up a heavy halberd, and Gus dons the armor of a legendary dwarf warrior. Will, feeling the weight of history, thinks about all the legendary heroes who once fought the High King. He prays for their peace wherever they may be and thanks them for their weapons, knowing it's now his turn to save the world from a great evil. So, guys, that's it for today's video. Watch the following video.